Welcome back to Faith and Logic, episode 11. Today we're talking addiction, as you can see from the thumbnail. Addiction and sobriety, actually. Had a bit of a break, sorted out a few things, wrote some new episodes. Today's one will be quite long, I imagine, as there's a lot to get through. And I don't really want to stall on this for too long. I think it's best, as we always do, to get straight to the point. We're talking addiction today. Addiction is something which I think um, well, is something we all experience in some manner of speaking, some form or another. I've certainly dealt with it myself. So I thought it was one of those topics that I wanted to get to again quite early on in the span of this journey, however long Faith and Logic exists for. Um, and as we always do, I think it's best to start with the terminology, the words, the meaning, understanding it from that perspective so that we can dig deeper into the nuances of what addiction is, what it means for us as individuals or as a society, as families, and all the other, I guess, ways that addiction can affect us. And we'll start with the words, as I said. So, addiction, the condition of being physically and mentally dependent on a particular substance and/or activity, a complete inability to control one's behavior in regard to this stimulus. I think we understand it quite neatly through those terms, right? When we're addicted to something, we have a strong physiological urge towards this thing, a desire and a need for it, which is very hard to quantify in words. It's a very carnal, physical thing, right? We will do anything to get this thing. This thing has complete control over our lives in a lot of ways. It creates a desire and a need for it, which is almost like being a slave, about like being enslaved by this thing, right? And we can't really control it at all. It causes us to do things which are out of character or out of the character by which people usually know us, and oftentimes can ruin our relationships. It can ruin our connections. It can ruin our own existence because we are now almost existing simply to engage with this stimulus, whether it's, a certain substance, a certain activity. And we'll get into what those are further into the episode, how the different forms of addiction are most neatly identified, and really just has complete control over us, right? It crushes us. It reduces us to a very singular form of the human experience, which again is living just to engage with this thing. The whatever pleasure or release it provides us, that becomes our entire need for, or reason for being, should I say. We're here solely for this thing, and usually it's an inanimate thing. It's something which has doesn't have sentience. It's as I said, a substance or an activity. um I guess actually from an outside standpoint, it's good to kind of put those into baskets, right? So if we're talking substance, most neatly we're talking about drugs and or alcohol, or other um kind of physical things which we would ingest, like cigarettes or vapes, laughing gas, all these other things, right? And then when we're talking about activity, we can look at things like gambling, um sex. These are the types of physical addictions that I think most are most inhibitive for the human nature, the human spirit, I would say. What I want to do now is, because I think addiction as a term is very well understood by us as a current society, but the etymology of this word, and for those who maybe don't know what etymology means, it just means the origins of the word. The etymology of the word addiction is quite interesting as far as where it comes from and how we've arrived at the usage for it today. The word addiction, or being an addict or addicted, derives from a Roman/Greek word, addictus. And this was used in a legal sense. Kind of had a multiple meanings, but most broadly used in a legal sense. And being described as addictus was essentially a referral to a form of enslavement which was derived from your lack of ability to pay a creditor, to you being in debt. Your inability to pay your creditor meant that you were addictus. Addictus meant that you would then be enslaved to your creditor, until the debt was paid or for a term of 60 days. If you didn't pay the debt off in 60 days, your creditor then had complete ownership of you and could do with you as they wished to. They could kill you, could sell you, they could continue to keep you enslaved. They owned you essentially, right? And I think you know where I'm going with this now. Addictus kind of has a strong relevancy to what we use the word addiction or addicted for today. You are essentially enslaved by this substance or activity that you cannot control your usage of. You have a habitual enslavement to this substance or this activity. And again, it's quite interesting how that terminology has kind of evolved over time. It had one meaning, and because maybe we've expanded our activity as a species, as a society over the last couple of hundred, 1,000 years, it now has this different meaning, which whilst it's not quite the same, it still has a strong connection to its origins in terms of the act or nature of enslavement to a thing. In this instance, it's not a person, right? We understand the terminology of being a slave to a person very differently. It's ownership of, it's treating people as possessions and or property. However, now we're talking about, when we talk about addiction or addictus, as the Romans would call it, that enslavement is to a substance or, an activity, as I said, which again, I think for me gives it, well, it's a higher level of weakness in some descriptions because a substance or activity should not have ownership of you. However, we understand in society today that we have very strong substances, and similarly, we have activities which have a very strong sensory output that can cause, this form of enslavement to some degree, right? Because of the nature of the resulting feeling from doing the activity or engaging with the stimulus or the substance, we become so connected to it that that's all we want to think about. That's all we want to do. We don't really have much will to resist them, right? Our will is bent by these substances and these activities because as a species, or as the flesh is, I would say, because we'll get into the faith aspect of this a lot further down the line. There's a lot to get through. As a species, we have a weakness through the flesh, which is quite stark. And again, we cannot easily get around it. For me, the best way around that weakness is through faith. However, I think we can fortify our minds to be stronger than our bodies and to see our way through what we would describe as, our addiction, our weakness through flesh. So just to go back and review those points quickly, as far as the words go, right? Addiction is our compulsion, our physical inability, our mental condition that it makes us dependent on a particular substance or activity. Derived from the word addictus, which is basically the Roman term for forced enslavement through your lack of ability to clear a debt. And it eventually would mutate into a meaning which was akin to sacrifice, to sell out, to betray, or to abandon. And again, I think we can also apply those terms in terms of today's addiction, as far as what we end up doing if we do have an addiction. We will sacrifice, ourselves, our loved ones, maybe. We will sell out ourselves or our loved ones. We will betray ourselves or our loved ones. And we will also abandon ourselves or our loved ones in order to have our fix of this thing that we're addicted to. That will often happen. It will compromise your honor, your integrity in ways that I think most men, most women don't want to be compromised, right? But however, this feeling, the urge, the desire for the stimulus is so strong that it almost alters our brain chemistry, and it forces us to do things that we know we don't necessarily want to do or should do. However, we have very little power to control or resist because of the strength of them, especially when we're talking about some of the more newer synthetic methamphetamines and the other amphetamines that we have today. Obviously, we know about opioids. These things are extremely powerful, and they're the strongest forms of addiction. And I don't think you can look down on someone for having this type of addiction, because if we all were to expose ourselves to the potential to be addicted, right, and that means just taking the opioid in a nature which is not, and even then, even when you do take it just for pain relief, you have a cause to become addicted to it, because sometimes your pain is so strong, and sometimes your maybe your doctor, your physician, and whoever prescribes you the medication, although they've warned you, you know that despite a warning, your body can just physiologically become dependent on these things. So again, we know what addiction means, we know where it comes from, and we know why we apply it today based on what it originally meant in times gone by. However, what's interesting to me is the synergy between the previous meaning and the current meaning is so apt that it is transferable in a very direct sense. Being addicted is essentially being enslaved to the substance or activity that you are unable to control your behavior towards. Physically, mentally dependent on this thing in order to feel at peace, I would say, or whole, or resolved in some description. And then again, that feeling of peace, absolution, resolvement is only temporary. It only lasts for as long as the fix lasts. So if it's getting drunk, it's taking opioids, if it's engaging in gambling, sex, whatever the thing is, that's only temporary. Okay, until you can get your next fix, you're still gonna be in that state of wanting, of needing that thing, which again, you might have to do terrible things in order to attain that fix. So the meanings are quite clear, and we understand why we have the proclivity towards such negative behaviors and tendencies when when we talk about addiction. um so then we can deal with kind of, I guess, the physiological and the reasoning aspect of addiction. How does it trap us? Why do we end up so stuck when we talk about addiction? Why is it that we can't just say, okay, I want to be free of this thing, and we just let go of it? Okay, it's very hard to do. It's very hard to find a clear jumping off point when it comes to addiction. It seems to have a grip on us which is unquantifiable, and that's because of the physical nature, right? But then there's also the mental aspect. I think within us there is a desire to be free from the addiction once we know that we are addicted, right? And then again, if that's okay, again, as I always do, I'm going to insert myself at this point, because a lot of people will tell you that weed, marijuana isn't an addictive substance because of the chemical nature of it compared to opioids or other things like alcohol or cigarettes. They'll tell you it's not addictive in that sense. And I'm not a scientist, so whether or not I agree is kind of irrelevant. I haven't done the study. I can only speak to my own physiology and mental well-being. And whilst, okay, let's on the surface level agree that weed is not innately addictive in its chemical makeup, what I can certainly attest to is an addiction to the subsequent feeling and state that it creates. I can agree that I was certainly addicted to the resulting feeling of smoking weed, even if the weed itself doesn't have addictive compounds within it. I'm not even sure if that's scientifically correct, but let's go with that for now. That addiction to the resulting state that I had a lot of negative knock-on effects, as you know, and compared to other substances, they're quite minor as far as what they would cause you, the physical state they would cause you to be in, and the acts they would cause you to do are quite different. You're not going to be itching, scratching, and physically, showing signs of your dependency if you can't have a joint. However, your mental state is going to be very fragmented and very disturbed if you're in a position where you build yourself up into a state of regularity, should I say regularity? I'm not even sure that's a word. You build yourself into a state of regularity with your marijuana use. You then have that regularity somewhat disturbed by, maybe you take a trip abroad as a good example, or your work schedule, or something disrupts your ability to smoke when you want. you get out of yourself a little bit. And if you're a regular weed smoker, you know this. You're a little bit antsier. You're quicker to react to things. You're a little short with people. And again, these are minor things, right? It's not gonna create a strong physical reaction, maybe more of a mental reaction, I would say, for weed. However, that addiction is quite clear because it changes your state. You are now a different version of yourself. You're a version of yourself which is not best served to the people around you. Okay. And that nature has to be understood and identified. I think if you deny it for yourself and you pretend like, okay, yeah, I'm not quite myself because I have my joint, but weed's not addictive, so it's not really a big deal. I just need to have a joint and then I'll loosen up, I'll lighten up, I'll be back to my usual self. Well, therein lies the problem. Your usual self should not be a state which is altered by some form of chemical change to your makeup, whether that's, again, weed's quite surface level to me. I would never really, and I actually think it should be legal, right? And a lot of places are legalizing it because of, it's quite harmless in the right dosage and usage. However, when we have access to these things, we as humans, we tend to abuse them. We like the feeling they provide us, and that causes us to then fall into a habit of overusing and over needing that feeling. As I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, as soon as I would come home from work previously, the first thing I would do was seek to smoke to get higher. And the reason for that was I liked the feeling. And the reason I liked the feeling was the regular feeling of being at work, doing my tasks, then coming home and maybe feeling like, okay, I want to be in a different place or state or transcend my current existence in terms of what I have access to and what I can do with my life was very much antidoted by just getting high and eating some good food and maybe watching a film. And these things are good, they're great. There's no reason you shouldn't enjoy them. But what I'm getting at here, as far as the reasonings go, is they are short term remedies for something which is more deep rooted within ourselves. And that's the reason we become addicted, I would say, from my personal experience. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, or a scientist, or any kind of physician. So I can only speak to this from my experience. And I'm not, this is more pseudoscience than anything else, things that I've learned through my own experience. So I don't want to misplace my inferences as any form of expertise on the matter. I'm simply giving my perspective. So that lack of fulfillment, that lack of balance, is what causes us to approach the substance. And I think gambling is another great example. It's one of the best examples of a physical activity. There's a rush from gambling, and I can't never say I've been a gambler. I've bet on things before, but gambling, I would never say something which really trapped me. There's a rush from the win you can get from gambling. And again, I'm using my own experiences and friends and other people to kind of speak to this. There's a rush you can get from the effects of gambling. However, I I would I would infer and I would say that I believe that most people gamble with the idea of changing their circumstances financially. That's the main reason. Yeah, okay, you win and you get that rush of endorphins, the chemicals start rushing and you feel good. It's like, wow, victory, I won. But again, that rush, I think, is more to do with what you can do with the money or the fact that you now have the money than it is to do with the fact that you won. There's a difference. And even maybe at a point when you get really rich, perhaps even if it's through gambling, that becomes real because, okay, you just like to win and you have enough money to gamble forever. Very few people are in that position anyway. But for most people who gamble, it's more about changing your circumstances, having more money to live a more comfortable life, and doing it in small increments that will ultimately build up to a larger sum that gives you freedom and eternal or larger possibilities with what you can do with your time. And the reality is the house always wins, as most of us know. Even the people who gamble a lot, they know the house always wins. But we still indulge in the activity because we feel like perhaps somewhere along the line there's going to be a point where we get the big win and you know we can say goodbye to gambling forever, or even just if it's the short win where it's like, okay, I gambled a bit here, now I've got, maybe I've made upwards of £5,000, and that's going to see me right for X amount of time. But we know that it's not going to last, right? And we're going to have to go back to gambling to win more. And in order to win more from gambling, we're going to have to spend more. And these things just never play out in our favor. I think that's the reality. Whenever you're looking at addiction, your desire to do the thing or to go further into it is what keeps you there, holds you there, and doesn't allow you to actually enjoy fulfillment in life through personal achievement, reasons for being, and having a purpose. So that's kind of my understanding of the physiological or internal reasoning behind those types of addiction. They're forms of escape or forms of us to either have or build towards something better. Okay, because at the end of the day, I think all of the human spirit, or most human spirits, desire freedom on some level, and those substances, those activities, give us a sensory replacement for actual freedom. Um, and ultimately, we know that there's very different ways to get there, but gambling or any substance abuse or anything like that, anything that forms a negative addiction, is not what's gonna put us in that position, right? We're gonna have to escape those things in order to actually have freedom. But the problem is they feel like freedom. They're good placebos. They're good antidotes to those feelings that we have, which are quite negative feelings. They allow us to escape them for a moment, a time, however long that is. So again, physiology and reasoning. So the introduction and prolonged usage seem to adjust brain chemistry and physiology to create a level of dependence that transcends the need to protect our own well-being. And this goes more towards the substances, I would say. Um, we know about opioids in great detail now. There's a lot of studies been done. Some of us have personal experience through loved ones, family members, friends who we've seen kind of go down that road towards abusing physical substances. And when it comes to the stronger ones, again, as I was saying earlier, I know we have homelessness is rife throughout a lot of Western society. We know that a lot of these people who are homeless have fallen into addiction, which is the reason they've ended up with the life that they're currently living. So we see the negativity that this can produce on a daily basis. And I think we can all want and need to get help, but a lot of it, again, as we know, is going to have to come from an internal place. And when you fall into a place where you even lose your home, your well-being, and your family, I think that shows just how powerful the enslavement is, the addictors behind these substances can be. I think it's, for most of us who live average lives, go to work, to fall that far off the cliff is quite scary. And we all look at homeless people perhaps in some respect and say, no, that could never be me. I have too much to lose and this, that, and the third. But I think when you really approach some of the people who are in this position in their reasoning, or not even reasoning, but how they ended up there, you realize that really it can be anyone. A bad day can create a moment where you can fall into this position where you just feel like there's no hope, and the sensations that the substances provide are an adequate replacement for whatever lifestyle or like I said, whatever lifestyle you thought you were living that was of value to you. The substances become more, they just provide more life, more freedom. It's a better sensation. um and I would say that those are the most harmful addictions, of course, right? Substances, especially the opioids and amphetamines, they can be very, very, very dangerous. That need for escape can create a destructive cycle that seems to ultimately end in lifelong illness and or death. A lot of people who have addictions do end up and ultimately end up dying because the strength and desire for that substance is greater than their will to live, and they're gonna continue to go after that substance until there's nothing of them left, and ultimately they expire because they weren't able to get the help they needed, or they just couldn't find a reason to live beyond the substance that was keeping them alive, which is, again, is a crazy cycle to be in. But again, that's what a lot of people are dealing with today. So again, we're dealing with the physiology, right? And the reasoning, which are the mental side of things. And I think largely what I'm talking about when I'm describing the reasonings, it's the coping with everyday life, the fun, the comfort of substances. That even goes down to like I said, food, sex, wine. I mean, I haven't really discussed alcohol but again, that's another big one that a lot of people find. And those sensory addictions, when we're talking about food and alcohol, sometimes the ones most accessible and easily leaned on because again, you can probably to some description lead a functional life with a bit of a food addiction or an alcohol addiction, although one again is quite a strong intoxicant, excuse me, depending on what you're drinking. um but what they do is, I think, especially when it comes to those two, is just provide, I guess, a level of relief. And a lot of times it's to do with traumatic thoughts and or feelings related to personal experiences, things we've seen or had done to us, or perhaps sometimes things that we've done to others that we want to kind of escape. I think a lot of our addiction, our desire for addiction, is tied up in our need to escape sometimes just what's going on in here. A need for escape, even if it's not trauma, just from the human condition. Again, without purpose, life can be quite confusing and uninteresting, I think, to some people, and sometimes even that is a cause for escape for some people. And the easiest way to escape that for some people is addiction through substances, through food, through alcohol, opioids, methamphetamines, and so on and so forth. And I think the difficulty there is that these these experiences, the traumas, the thoughts, the feelings that we want to run away from, they can, in a way, cast doubt over our self worth. And I think that is, we're kind of getting to the heart of the matter now, from my perspective. If you have these things happen to you, or you have these feelings that don't embolden you with, a strong sense of self or of value, you're not really going to give yourself a very strong reason to live. In fact, you're going to be more inclined to indulge in things which can be harmful to you because you don't really care. Your attitude is kind of indifference towards your existence, which again, just being alive is a great gift. So we cannot take that for granted. And abusing substances is certainly an act of taking it for granted, because we also know that one dosage, the wrong dosage, can kill you off instantly. I mean, I don't mean instantaneously, but one night spent on substances can be the end of you. But yet, so many of us take that risk, whether it's going to the club or out on the weekend or to the pub or hanging out with friends or whatever we choose, whatever or wherever we choose to do the harmful thing. That can really be your last day. And we accept that as part of it, which is why I think it is very much tied to our own value of self, our own sense of self-worth, which create, or lack thereof, which creates our ability to even form an addiction in the first place. Because from my perspective and my understanding and my experience, there's no individual with a truly high sense of self-worth and value that puts substance addiction over their own well-being. And this again was the equation that I had to get around. Once I found a path for purpose and an understanding of what that purpose was and how important it is that I pursue that purpose, it was a lot easier for me to say, well, okay, again, weed is not the strongest, most addictive substance, but it's much easier for me to push it to the side and say, I don't want that anymore. I have this thing here, which is my purpose, which is of great power and value to me and imbues me with self-worth to a point where it's greater than anything that thing can give me. It's more valuable. It fills my spirit to a level which, no substance could possibly do. And although the sensory feeling of the substance might be great, I know that the long-term value of this purpose, this reasoning, this reason for being, will far outweigh it as far as what it will return to me, if I pursue it, if I give it control, if I allow this to be my reason for existing. And again, that goes back to the enslavement, right? So you could say that I'm enslaved by my purpose, and I very much have been always, and I might have fallen off my course or path previously in many moments in life. However, I think fundamentally beneath that, I've always been enslaved by my purpose. And I think if there's anything to be enslaved by, that is certainly the thing that you would want to choose to have you enslaved. Being enslaved by your purpose creates a level of honor and understanding in what you must do to fulfill yourself, which is far greater, again, than any substance can give you. And again, these are very difficult things, I think, to get to. They require a lot of deep thought, a lot of introspection. I think a lot of times as well, we maybe aren't willing to do that because, again, we have other deep traumatic things which kind of sit on top of that stuff. But it's all about the personal work and trying to figure a way, because as I said, in previous episodes, I do believe we all have a purpose. We all have a reason for being. It doesn't have to be something huge, but I think we all do have a reason for being here, for being on the planet. And understanding what that reasoning is for yourself is what's going to keep you safe and keep you on a path to your own level of success. But to the point, I think self-worth and addiction are uniquely tied together. Having a strong sense of self-worth will keep you from addiction, addictive behaviors, things which are just personally destructive for your own mind and body, essentially, is what we're trying to say. So we understand what addiction is. We understand, I guess, a little bit about why it grips us and the unique element within us, which I think can protect us from it, which is self-worth. And self-worth, again, is quite a broad term. It doesn't really pinpoint any one thing. But I think what we're talking about when in terms of addiction is, okay, let's say we're addicted to a substance. And again, I can use myself as the example. If I had just tried to remove weed from my life, and let's say I put myself in a scenario where I had no access to it, I couldn't smoke it, I went cold turkey one day. If I don't feel that void with something, I'm very, very, very quickly going to return to my addiction. Okay. Without that self worth and that reason for being, I'm not going to beat the addiction. I'm just going to go back because I haven't done the kind of the introspection and mental work that's required to kind of find the reason not to be addicted to the substance. And again, that's really what we're talking about here. What is your reason? If you have a reason to be addicted, what is your reason to stop being addicted? Why should you stop the habit that you have? Why should you stop being enslaved to that thing? What is it that you can do, can provide, can be that's going to tear you away from this substance which has a hold over you? Okay. So this sense of self-worth or the reason for being doesn't have to be grand, big, or even visible to many others, but it is your reason for continuing to fight every single day until the battle with your own brain is well and truly won. And that is essentially what we're doing here. I would like to perhaps, and I don't, but let's just say for sake of argument that I want to go and have a joint today. My reason for being and my self-worth and the value I have behind that are what keeps me from just going picking up an eighth or a quarter or a half. I don't know why I'm naming the weights, but those things are what keep me from going and going back to that which I was previously very invested in and continuing to invest in this, in you guys, in myself, because like I said, the value of this is much greater. And although, again, it's not necessarily a daily battle for me now, I've arrived at a point where I understand the value so neatly that weed as something I could indulge in, even, I could bring it back in moderation, right? But that's only going to open the door to non-moderation and, in fact, devotion and sacrifice for, right? And that's not where I want to be. I want to be in this place where this thing, which has positive effects on me and the people around me, and hopefully people even beyond my field of view and connection, are going to benefit from me not being the individual who's addicted to a substance. And that is ultimately where, I found myself, and where I think people who are addicted to something need to find themselves. You need to find your reason for being. That is what's going to fill you with the strength to battle and fight and be in that conflict day by day, having a reason, right? Having a reason to carry on, to continue, to fight the substance and to be the person that you're supposed to be. So again, without filling the void left by the addiction, which is really about finding your reason for being and your reason for self-worth and purpose, without filling that void, you are only going to go back. And we have to be stronger than that. In order to be stronger than that, we need that purpose. We need that reason for being. Um, and then just to summarize that, I've written it down like this. So without filling the void with positive acts and behaviors, we're inclined to go back to our addiction or replace it with another harmful expression of our addictive nature. And again, that's another one which I think is very common amongst people who have addictive personalities or have addictions, is that, okay, if you can get yourself off one, but you don't feel the void, you're then inclined to fill it with something else that may not be positive, but may also cause an addictive nature within you. So I think in that aspect of ourselves, it's very important that, okay, let's say we don't have something to fill the void. We at least need to include or introduce positive behaviors or positive actions, which are going to stop us from going back, stop us from continuing that addictive thing that we're doing, which is harmful to ourselves, and replace it with something which has a positive effect on ourselves, like meditation, like running, like working out, like charity. Like there's all types of things that you can do which are going to replace that feeling with, you know, maybe some other form of endorphin, but aren't going to be harmful to you in the same way that the substance was. So that void has to be filled. Without filling that void, we're only going to end up going back. And again, we have to make sober fun. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine from Spain recently, and that was kind of the point that we arrived at. Although we have all these intoxicants, these things that can create great joy and euphoria and momentary pleasure for us, how can we make being sober fun? That's really what you have to get down to, because there's great fun in sobriety, although a lot of people will tell you there's not. There is. It's just about you finding that space for yourself. What is the thing within sobriety, within a lack of intoxication, which is going to make you feel intoxicated because of how much euphoria you get from doing this thing, which has a positive outcome on you or the people around you? That's really where we have to get to. It's a difficult place to get to, one which I think is largely driven by, you know, hopefully driven by altruistic reasons, but is probably driven by our sense of self and our need to do something with ourselves. But we have to find it. We definitely have to find it. Um, and I think then we look at, you know, our intoxication with substances, and we have to be realistic with ourselves and say, okay, sobriety has to be fun. So then we look at the intoxication and say, how much of that is due to unhappiness or imbalance or something which is not quite right with a certain aspect of our life or our past. And if we're being honest with ourselves, there's always going to be some form of connection between our need for that intoxication, our need for that, you know, separation from our regular self into an intoxicated or euphoric state, and something that we experienced previously, or something that isn't quite right with us, or something that we see within ourselves that we're not happy with or happy about, or, you know, it's always tied up in our past, right? And we have to, I guess, face that head on and make a new commitment to enjoy life through a sober lens, which again is our highest state. It's going to bring a level of clarity of self which is far beyond anything that an intoxicant an intoxicant can give you. And if we're able to do that, I think we then put ourselves in a state where our limits change. We can do things which perhaps we never thought we could do that we now can, because we're our brain chemistry has changed. We're altered. We were limited before. We were limited by our what we viewed as our highest state. and we accepted maybe a lower level, which meant that our sense of self was reduced significantly, and that opened us up to substance abuse. When we remove that and we allow the clarity of sobriety to take over, we then feel unchained and unbound and unlimited by our potential. We now feel like, okay, if I beat this thing that had its hold over me, that had me enslaved, what else can I beat? What else can I do? Where are my upper limits when it comes to life? If I never saw a way out from this thing, and now I'm out from under it, I'm standing on top of it, and it can't defeat me anymore. What else can I do? Surely there is more to life now that I've been able to beat this thing and achieve something which seemed impossible at one point. So we have to always aim for better and remove our personal limitations to exceed what we perceived as our highest limits. And I think this is something that sobriety can give you, because it allows you that mental clarity and fortitude that being intoxicated and addicted just doesn't give you, right? Because you're enslaved. There is something that is greater than you, and it's the substance. When you're addicted, the substance has more power than you do. No matter what you think of yourself at that moment, while you're addicted, one thing that is for certain true and factual is that that thing that you're addicted to is greater than you. You cannot say you're greater than the thing you're addicted to. You can't, because it has complete hold over you. You are a slave to it. Okay. And the slave cannot be greater than its master. That's never been the case. Right. So acknowledging these things and accepting these things is very important. And I think in doing so is where you're going to find the strength to beat your addiction. But again, this is very difficult stuff and requires great introspection. This is why I've done some of the work for us, right? And I'm sharing it with you guys so that even if today is not the day you choose to quit, perhaps further down the line, these things will trigger something in you and it will allow you to just say no more. Today's the day. I have to become greater than my master. And in order to do that, I'm gonna have to put down this substance and say that it doesn't have any power over me anymore. I am now in a state where I have complete power, control, and dominion over it. And again, that is real freedom. If you're addicted to anything, that is the freedom you're looking for. You're looking to be free from the substance. You're looking to be free from the acts that it causes you to do, the lying, the cheating, the stealing, the fighting, and or killing in some instances that are required to keep your fix alive. You want to be free from those, because those aren't really acts that you want to do. They're just what's required for you to maintain the feelings that the substance provides you. And we know, as I said, in reality, that is not your higher self. So as we were kind of discussing here, so the introduction of positive addictions, positive behaviors, right? Like running or meditation, things that strengthen an individual's functioning, engaging in behaviors, daily, like an hour or so, will produce a non-critical transcendental state of mind, as far as, especially when it comes to like meditation or running or anything that you do outdoors, or like training, for instance, the where they push you to mentally, and a lot of the population will attest to this, even if they aren't doing these things out of a need to not be addicted to a substance, there's a euphoria in these things that is not so quantifiable, because I think this is as I would say, our connection to a higher power, our higher self, but they create a clarity of mind that is unfathomable almost in some regards. I always have my best thinking. I do my best thinking, my best remunerating, my best communing with myself while I'm training, or while I'm meditating, or while I'm doing exercise. These are the things that allow me to really connect with myself internally and break through problems I'm having, or issues I might be facing, or things I'm hoping to understand better about myself or others that maybe are eluding me. I always do that best when I'm engaging in a positive addictive behavior, something which has a positive effect on my body, or on my mind, or on my sense of self. That is how I'm able to kind of get around the I mean, not so much now, as I said before, but that is initially how I really got around my addictive tendencies. And again, with this, studying um, these topics and delivering, talks on them to people, whoever watches this video or listens to this on Spotify, that has filled me with more euphoria and sense of self-worth and purpose than any substance, in my case the weed, could ever have done. So it's really about finding the positive addiction or positive behavior you can replace your addiction with. That's going to allow you to start a new life. Essentially, you're going to be reborn after that. You're going to find yourself in a completely different state, one which I think again was seemed impossible and beyond comprehension, but once you arrive there, feels like where you always should have been. Okay, and that's really about us, like, as I said, finding our purpose, finding our reasons for being, and finding that true self-worth from within, which is going to keep us on a path to, you know, success, I would hope, but at least, a sense of peace, which I think cannot be taken for granted, especially in the world that we live in today. I'm nearing the end of this particular topic, and I hope that this has been useful or valuable to whoever's listening to it. If you aren't addictive, again, this is something that perhaps you could share with someone who you know has a bit of an addiction and maybe hasn't admitted it to themselves yet. But what I want to do, as we often do at this time of the conversation, is to offer you the most powerful tool in your journey to sobriety / freedom from addiction. Okay, and that is, of course, the higher power. And again, some of you might be turning off now. Some of you might be saying, "Oh, okay, he's getting into his mumbo jumbo. I don't really want to hear this. The other stuff was kind of helpful. This is not so helpful because we don't believe in all that." However, it's fundamental for many things, but addiction in particular, to have a connection to your higher power. Through the higher power, we understand that the flesh is weak. We are highly susceptible to many stimulus that can gain an incredibly strong grip over our human form. And that is when we talk about the physical addiction, what that how that manifests, and what the resulting effects of that are. Especially when we're talking about the stronger substances like opioids or amphetamines or alcohol, for instance. Less so about things like sex and gambling, because I think you can beat those without the higher power. But I think, again, we're talking about things that affect your body and your mind. It's always best to lead with a connection to the higher power. Our our higher state, our higher self, our consciousness, our mind can be imbued with strength beyond our understanding through faith in our Creator. And what we're doing here in terms of addiction is we're just saying and understanding that, okay, the flesh is weak, but the mind has great strength, because the mind is synonymous with the Creator. That is the individual, the entity, the being which gave us our consciousness. It's a reflection of this thing, which again we cannot understand, can never hope to understand, which is why I think a lot of us shy away from it, because it seems impossible. Although we're able to create as individuals ourselves, we do not understand that someone created us, which is a very strange dichotomy. But having that understanding that we were created, I think, will fill you with a sense of strength which your mind alone or your body alone cannot give you. It is an acknowledgement that the substance and the thing which has its hold over you is not greater than the consciousness that dwells within you. And having that understanding can help you to quite quickly and swiftly alleviate some of the most difficult parts of addiction, because you acknowledge that you yourself alone cannot beat this thing. I mean, like I said, you can, but it's going to be easier if you have that connection to the higher power. So faithful acknowledgement of this truth creates understanding over our weakness and allows us to fortify ourselves against all forces and substances. Okay, and that's really just a summary of what I just described there. Okay, so having that understanding that there is something much greater than ourselves will give us that strength to beat the thing which has a physical hold over us in this realm. And this is most neatly done by accepting our shortcomings and using prayer to create unfathomable strength in ourselves. And that is really, I'm using the word prayer, I'm talking about just communicating with the higher power in a very direct sense. And you can do this verbally, non-verbally, It's really about how you feel best doing that. And again, having that understanding creates a level of strength which is, yeah, unquantifiable. It can fortify you in ways that you never thought were possible. But again, this requires, introspection. It requires a seeking of truth, and it requires an openness to understanding the greatest truth. And again, I understand that's not something that all of us have readily, and some of us are still finding our way towards that, and some of us maybe, have already found it, but might have fallen away from it. Okay, so again, if that's you, if you're someone who has that faith, think about ways that you can return to the path. Maybe a simple prayer or conversation with the Creator is the best way to do that. Um, but really, it's about you, the individual, connecting with the higher power and finding your route to sobriety in the truest form. That's episode 11, addiction and sobriety. If anyone has any questions, points they want to share, feel free to message or email me or comment on this video. Again, as I always say, you do not have to comment, like, share, or subscribe. But if you think this conversation could be of help to anyone that you know, please do send it to them, share it with them. Hopefully, it will be a trigger for them to understand themselves better and maybe seek to get some help with something that they're dealing with that they don't feel that they can handle by themselves. I will see you guys in episode 12. Thank you.